This week on the agenda, tech titans, how China is looking to challenge the world by innovating faster, working harder and going global. Technological innovation has been placed at the very heart of China's 15th five-year plan, a key driver for the world's second largest economy heading to 2030. So what is going to drive that innovation? And what exactly is China doing differently? With me now is the author of The New Tech Titans of China, Rebecca A. Fannin. Great to have you on the agenda, Rebecca. Now, when we talk about global tech leadership today, where does China really sit?
Well, that's a good starting point. We are talking about the US and China being the two tech superpowers, and China catching up to the US. China is definitely on the rise. It's progressed so much over the past 2 decades and continues to do so in many of the leading technology sectors.
I mean, what would you say surprised you most about China's evolving tech ecosystem while you've been researching China's tech titans?
Well, I think the shift to industrial technology, the robotics, the advanced manufacturing, the energy segment, the supply chain, it shifted from a consumer story to much more of an industrial story. And in those areas, China is definitely leading because China is the factory of the world and the supply chain goes with that. It's a major shift in the past decade, I would say, in terms of what tech innovation is coming from China. In the past, it was a lot about copying from the US, and it was in the dot-com era. And then we have progressed since then into China innovating on its own accord, and sometimes the Western world copying what China is doing. That's happening, for instance, in electric vehicles. That's one example, one prominent example of where China is leading, and is leading in all kinds of innovations around electric vehicles, such as the charging stations, the battery swapping stations, just the cool, highly efficient Chinese electric vehicles. So that's one area, but there's many other areas too where China has gotten the lead. Batteries is one. China is the world's dominant battery maker. It's rising as a force in robotics and, of course, humanoid robots, which is a really interesting sector. So all kinds of things are bubbling up.
Now, you've been covering China's tech sector for years, so I know you've seen lots of changes and lots of evolutions, but your first book came out in 2019. What's the biggest shift you've seen since then that inspired you to go with the next edition?
Silicon Dragon was my first book on China tech, and that was 2008, very early on. That was the era of Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, the so-called bot, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, who really were dominant in internet areas, search, gaming, those kind of areas. And those companies are still, those tech titans are still there today, but they have changed quite a bit from their original idea or business idea, which was kind of like the Amazon of China, the Facebook of China, the Google of China. Now, these tech titans have moved into much deeper technology, such as AI. All of them are investing billions into AI, large language models, agentic, AI, physical AI. They're acquiring companies, they're starting up companies. And so it's been interesting because that idea of the AI era has only been in the past 5 years. So in my new edition, I talk quite a bit about AI and how China is gaining in AI and becoming a much bigger competitor to the US. I think everyone remembers the DeepSeek moment.
Yeah.
That was when, yeah.
Did that mark a turning point? Would you say where how the world sees where cutting edge innovation is coming from?
Yeah, it was a deep seek moment. It was a shock for Silicon Valley and the Western world that China could create this large language model with virtually no venture capital spending. It was all self-financed by a hedge fund company, and it shocked Silicon Valley. Oh my gosh, China's catching up with us on AI too now. And we have invested so much money into Anthropic and OpenAI and billions more. And so have we overpaid? Are we in a bubble now of the AI economy? Definitely we're seeing DeepSeek moments playing out.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something you said earlier. China creating the Google of China, the Facebook of China, the Amazon of China. Many in the West still do view Chinese tech companies as imitators. And based on your research, where do you think that perception might fall short?
Well, I think DeepSeek is a good example, but in batteries, for instance, CATL is the world's leading battery maker, and even the Western companies are using Chinese-made batteries. So this is an area where innovation in batteries is a very complex area, and China is leading in that. I think there are certain areas where China is not leading in yet, but we should probably keep a watch on areas like semiconductors, where China has not been the strongest force in semiconductors. Semiconductors is one area where China needs to double down on its innovation skills. But overall, in many of these these new technologies, China is getting ahead fast.
So robotics, batteries, EVs, things that you've already mentioned. Why then do you think that this copycat label still persists?
If you look at drones, for instance, that's another area. DJI is the world's leading consumer drone maker, and it has innovated all kinds of powerful flying mechanisms, and that's an area where it's strictly China tech. And drones is an extremely important technology, not only for consumer, but for industrial and even military use.
Now, we've long thought about Silicon Valley as this center of innovation gravity. Are we now looking at a genuinely more multipolar tech world, do you think, with China as a co-leader?
Oh, I would say so, yes. I think this trend has been going on for a couple decades, where we've seen the spread of Silicon Valley tech innovation and capital and talent spread across the US, spread globally. There are many other Silicon Valleys that have emerged, and China is very dominant in that. Places like Beijing and Guangzhou and Hangzhou, each one of them has their own specialty. I think Hong Kong as well, and it's not just those areas, but India is coming up too. India, you could call that Silicon Tiger. I wrote another book called Startup Asia, which talked about how India was coming along fast right behind China. It's been a little slower to develop, but in the past couple years, India has come on strong with a number of companies that have gone public and its own tech titans as well. So yeah, this Silicon Valley story has rapidly spread. I think one area where Silicon Valley clearly has the lead is in AI. San Francisco is the AI epicenter, and many of most of the leading AI companies are based in San Francisco. So you have all this talent converging, and that when you have that cluster effect, you tend to have even more innovation and faster innovation because everyone's competing and it's all very exciting. And who's next with the next greatest idea?
It's interesting that you talk about this cluster effect and of course, talent. I mean, how would you characterize the fundamental difference in the approach to innovation between China, the tech hubs in China and other places in the world, and Silicon Valley?
Well, right. Interestingly enough, the China tech story went into fast forward partly because of Silicon Valley capital and talent. It was fed by the Sand Hill Road venture capitalist, and they're investing. They invested in these original tech titans of China and have invested in many of their startups since then. But lately, over the past a few years, that current has stopped. And this is partly because of geopolitics. We have seen a separation of US and China venture and technology growth, and that's continues. That's continuing. We are seeing China for China, and the Western world for the Western world, and we're seeing different types of standards emerge because of that in technology. That's a worrisome factor because we don't want multiple standards for things like batteries and or electric vehicles. We want a global standard that can push innovation forward for all of us. So I think this is an ongoing story. I think it's one to watch whether we're going to see a return to the collaboration that we had in the prior decade, and it remains to be seen. But right now, I would say we are seeing a split of these two tech nations, each going their own path, and how long this will last, it will probably last several more years.
I mean, is there scope for closer collaboration, cooperation, maybe tech in space?
Well, maybe. Or maybe semiconductors. If we see more, it's hard to say, really. Maybe electric vehicles. But so right now, the U.S. is keeping the Chinese electric vehicles out of the market through trade and tariff means, and also through concerns about data privacy. But that this is an area where China is so far advanced that the U.S. Could probably benefit from some of the advancements that Chinese EVs could bring to the U.S. market, and without the U.S. reinventing the so-called wheel. So I think that's one area where we could see some collaboration and maybe some joint ventures that result. For instance, we saw TikTok, that idea of bringing a Chinese company in that was bringing in new innovation. TikTok was, highly innovative, highly successful. It was allowed to come into the U.S. market through a means of a separate ownership structure. Now, this could happen with Chinese electric vehicle makers, too.
But it might be a bumpy or a winding road. Look, China's 15th five-year plan puts very specific emphasis on areas like AI, advanced manufacturing, tech self-sufficiency. How targeted and strategic is that approach compared to what's going on in the US, compared to what's going on in Europe?
Oh, it's highly strategic. This is national ambition to become the world's tech leader. And it is targeted to sectors that push the economy forward. And I think there are lessons there to be learned by other markets. In the US, we've had reinvestment into the industrial heartland, for instance, but it's been rather bumpy, to use your word. and a push toward developing our own semiconductor industry in Silicon Heartland, which is another book I wrote, Silicon Heartland, the idea that the industrial heartland of the US needs to be rebuilt to its former status and its former strength, but in new ways, for instance, in semiconductors. That's an area that has gotten a lot more government investment in the US. And of course, in China, this is driven by the government policy of, these 5-year plans. And then that creates a funnel effect for lots of new investment going into those areas that are highly targeted by the government.
So is it that funnel effect? Because when you look at how all of this is executed, state backing, scale, speed, what is China doing differently that allows companies to rise so quickly?
Well, I think you just mentioned it, the scale, the speed, the efficiency, the whole supply chain being built in China, so that new ideas can become commercial, can be commercialized, can get into the market more quickly. That's what China has been really good at, is having these innovations get into the market very quickly, such as you take robo-taxis, the Baidu has gotten very big, and Apollo and those self-driving robotic vehicles. Well, we in the United States, we had a company called Cruise that didn't make it. GM canceled it. But Apollo is going very strong in robotic vehicles. So this is just an example of where these ideas get commercialized very quickly. And that is a real strength, I think, of China's tech scene, this idea of having things get into practical applications.
Rebecca, I want to talk about people, because in your book you track a new wave of entrepreneurs. Who are they? And how do they differ maybe from that first generation, like Alibaba's Jack Ma or Tencent's Pony Ma?
Right. Well, the first generation were mainly entrepreneurs, business people who got a start by a great education in the Western world. Some of them had experience in Silicon Valley, too. They went to Stanford, or they went to MIT, leading universities, and they were around the culture of entrepreneurship. And they brought that idea to China when China was opening up to entrepreneurship. This started around 1999, 2000. That's when Alibaba got started. That's when Tencent got started. That's when Baidu got started. And that created a domino effect of many other tech companies coming along the line. They saw the success of entrepreneurs like Jack Ma and Tony Ma and Robin Li, who became some of the world's top billionaires, which is an amazing story in and of itself. But that created this domino effect of others saying, well, look, they did it. Then others wanted to do this. So it became much more of a China for China story then as well. Instead of taking the idea and the culture of Silicon Valley to China, it was more, okay, let's create our own Silicon Valley here with our own talent here, our own engineers, our own universities, and create new companies.
I want to develop something you touched on earlier, in that we do have to consider the geopolitical backdrop here. You know, how far is geopolitics shaping the pace of China's tech rise, through things like export controls, semiconductor restrictions, and competition for critical minerals?
Well, this is certainly one of those gigantic factors. And we have seen the restrictions on AI chips to China. That's been playing out over the past 2 years, which again is something new in this new book that I talk about. The whole geopolitical scene has played a much more forceful role in tech development between China and the U.S. than a decade ago. We've seen the export restrictions, the import restrictions, the review of any kind of new investment in the U.S., the review of IPOs, public market offerings. And if you look at one deal that recently happened in the AI space with Manus, a leading AI company that had moved to Singapore to get around some of the restrictions. That deal went through, and then Meta bought it for $2 billion. But now the geopolitical situation has led to some new scrutiny of that deal. And that's something that's been happening over the past 5 years, where it used to be a fairly vibrant pipeline of China investment into the US, US investment into China, into many of the leading tech sectors. But today, we see this competition, geopolitical rivalry, creating the split of these two nations going their own ways.
Now, China's 5-year plan also talks about opening up and attracting more foreign investment. Where do you see the most realistic opportunities for collaboration for both governments and private companies?
Well, I think China has a big advantage in investing in the global South and leading many of its Chinese tech companies into new areas in Asia, so that China becomes the leader in the Asian markets, and the U.S. In the Western markets. We're seeing that happening right now. So I think in foreign investment coming into China, well, a number of the leading Western companies are already in China in areas like hotels and restaurants and leading brands, luxury brands. It's not so much of a tech story as it is more of a lifestyle story.
Rebecca, is there a note of caution here? I mean, where are the potential weak spots in China's tech evolution right now?
Well, I think you have to look at the underlying socioeconomic factors and look at the demographics. There is unemployment, particularly among youth. We have seen a decrease in the population, the birth rate in China, which can be a worrisome factor for economic growth. We have pockets of poverty. It's really the underlying societal factors where there's a problem, and real estate continues to be a troublesome area for China. So I think it really is about creating a better lifestyle for the Chinese population, and having a market that functions on many levels. And so we're still seeing pockets of differences and gaps in advancements that could better society. So I think that's an issue for China. It's not just an issue for China, but it's an issue for any emerging country.
Another issue for all economies is right now attracting, developing, keeping the right talent. What changes are you seeing there? What's the challenge there for China?
Right. Well, I think the challenge there is we have seen Chinese scientists developing new breakthroughs in the US, and then going back to China to develop those technologies in China because there's fewer restrictions there. It's more of a wide open market for those new breakthroughs to get into areas. But I think that's an area to watch, is where you're seeing the Chinese scientists, and also I would say the university students. There's been new restrictions on university students from China, although I think the U.S. continues, and many places in Europe continue to be the beacon for educational studies. And I think the Western world, that's an area where I think the Western world excels, and that China still looks to the Western world, to the U.S., for leadership in education, in a way of thinking, a way of creative thinking, imaginative thinking, that China can learn from.
Let's look ahead to the next 5 to 10 years. What developments or key signals should we all be watching most closely for in China's tech story? Is it all going to be about AI?
I hope not. I think it's a much broader story than that, but certainly AI plays out in many of these tech sectors. I think I've already mentioned many of the tech sectors that China is leading in. I think China will continue to lead in those areas and will strengthen in those areas. It will cause the U.S. and Western nations to respond with competitive technologies and business models. That's one area to watch. I think in geopolitics, the relations between the trade relations, and it's not just a tech story, but it's the trade relations as well, between the U.S. and China. If you look at what happened with the rare earth minerals, that's a tech story and a trade story. So I think we need to look at those kind of areas that cross the line between trade and technology, and how important it is to have positive U.S.-China relations, and that can benefit the growth of technology innovation overall.
Rebecca Fannin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out @The Agenda Show on TikTok.
Coming up on a future agenda, the true value of data. Who's really in control of our online information? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.